The humidity and soul didn't just hang in the air, it clung to you like a second skin, thick with the scent of roasted street food, exhaust fumes, and the metallic tang of an approaching storm. For Maya, it was a sensory assault. She stood on the edge of the Myeongdong district, the neon lights bleeding into the wet pavement, turning the world into a kaleidoscope of artificial colors. She was a silhouette of defiance, a black woman in a leather jacket, her braids pulled back tight, eyes scanning the crowd with a precision that didn't belong to a tourist. She wasn't here for the skincare shops or the cat cafes. She was here for a ghost. Across the city, encased in the soundproof glass of a penthouse that overlooked the Han River, Tae-joon watched the same rain. If Maya was a storm, Tae-joon was the eye of it, deadly calm and terrifyingly still. He was the prince of the Yongpa, the Dragon Clan, the most sophisticated syndicate in the country. He wore a charcoal suit that cost more than most people made in a year, but to him, it was just armor. His father, the chairman, was dying. The transition of power was a bloody rite of passage, and the vultures were already circling. Tae-joon's phone buzzed on the mahogany desk, a burner phone. The message was simple: the American is in Myeongdong. She's asking about the '98 fire. Tae-joon's grip tightened on his glass of whiskey. The '98 fire was the foundation upon which his father had built their empire. It was also the night Maya's world had ended. Back in the crowded streets, Maya felt the shift in the atmosphere before she saw the men. It was a ripple in the crowd, a sudden clearing of space that happened when fear moved through a room. 4 men in identical black windbreakers were closing in. They didn't look like the police. They moved with the synchronized grace of predators. Maya didn't panic. Panic was for people who had something to lose. She ducked into a narrow alleyway, the walls closing in, smelling of damp stone and trash. She reached into her bag, her fingers brushing the cold steel of a tactical baton. "I know you're there," she called out, her voice steady despite the adrenaline. "You've been following me since the airport. If you want to talk, let's talk. If you want to fight, I hope you've got good insurance." The men didn't answer. They moved. The fight was a blur of motion. Maya used the narrowness of the alley to her advantage, using the walls to launch herself into kicks that landed with sickening thuds. She was fast, fueled by a decade of martial arts and a lifetime of resentment. But these weren't street thugs, they were soldiers. One grabbed her arm, his grip like a vice, while another pulled a jagged blade. Suddenly, the screech of tires echoed through the alley. A black sedan swung around the corner, its headlights blinding them all. The men froze. The back door opened, and a man stepped out. He didn't run, he walked with the slow, deliberate pace of someone who owned the ground he stood on. The rain soaked his hair instantly, pushing it back from a face that was hauntingly handsome and utterly cold. Tae-joon. The 4 attackers bowed so low their foreheads nearly touched their knees. With a flick of his wrist, Tae-joon dismissed them. They vanished into the shadows without a word. Maya stood her ground, chest heaving, blood trickling from a scrape on her cheek. She didn't bow. She didn't flinch. She looked the Prince of Seoul right in his eyes. "You're late," she spat, wiping the blood with the back of her hand. "I expected the big boss to show up 10 minutes ago." Tae-joon looked at her, really looked at her. He saw the fire in her eyes, the way she didn't look at him with fear, but with a challenge. It was a look he hadn't seen in years. In the hierarchy of his world, everyone was a tool or an obstacle. Maya was neither. She was an anomaly. "You are Maya Vance," he said, his English perfect, flavored with a deep, melodic rasp. "You are looking for the man who burned down the Busan textile mill 27 years ago." "I'm looking for the man who murdered my father," Maya corrected him, stepping closer into the halo of the car's headlights. "And I think I'm looking at his son." Tae-joon tilted his head. The rain was coming down harder now, a deluge that threatened to wash them both away. "If you stay in this city, you will die. My father does not like loose ends, and you, Maya, are a very loud, very bright thread that needs to be cut." "Then cut it," she challenged, stepping into his personal space. Tae-joon didn't reach for a weapon. Instead, He reached out and caught a stray braid that had fallen over her shoulder, his thumb grazing the skin of her neck. The contact was electric, a spark of CAMA, an unexpected warmth in the middle of a freezing storm. For a second, the mafia war and the family vendettas vanished. There was only the sound of the rain and the heat between two people who were born to destroy each other. "Not tonight," Tae-joon whispered. "Tonight, I'm going to show you why some ghosts should stay buried." He opened the car door. It wasn't an invitation, it was a command. Maya looked at the car, then back at the dark alley she had just escaped. She knew that getting into that car was a vow of her own, a step into a world of vengeance from which there was no return. She climbed in. The interior of the sedan smelled of expensive leather and sandalwood, a sharp contrast to the humid, trash-strewn air of the Myeongdong alley. Maya sat as far from Tae-joon as the seat allowed, her muscles still coiled like a spring. She watched the neon blur of Seoul streak across the window. Beside her, Tae-joon was a statue of composure, his eyes fixed on the tablet in his lap as if he hadn't just rescued, or kidnapped, the woman who wanted his father's head on a platter. "Where are you taking me?" Maya's voice was steady, but the adrenaline was beginning to ebb, leaving behind a cold, hollow tremor. "To a place where the walls don't have ears," Tae-joon replied without looking up. "The men who attacked you work for my uncle. He is less patient than I am. He sees your arrival in Korea not as a quest for justice, but as a leak that needs to be plugged with concrete. And you? What do you see?" Tae-joon finally turned his head. His dark eyes caught the passing light of a red street lamp, making them glow with a predatory intensity. "I see a complication. One that I haven't decided whether to solve or to protect." The car ascended the winding roads of Namsan Mountain, moving away from the glass towers of the city toward a secluded estate hidden behind high stone walls topped with traditional black tiles. This was the Dragon's Den, the ancestral heart of the Kang family. As the gates hummed open, Maya saw a sprawling hanok, traditional Korean house, fused with modern architectural marvels. Ancient pine trees, twisted by centuries of wind, stood guard over manicured gardens. Tae-joon led her through a labyrinth of polished wooden corridors. The sound of their footsteps echoed off the paper-screened doors, Hanji. They reached a massive iron-reinforced door at the end of a long hallway. Tae-joon pressed his palm against the scanner. With a pressurized hiss, the door slid open to reveal a room that felt like a sanctuary of high-tech betrayal. This was his war room. Monitors lined the walls, scrolling through international bank transfers, surveillance feeds, and blueprints. In the center of the room sat a low, traditional tea table made of dark walnut. "Sit," Tae-joon commanded. Maya ignored the cushion and walked toward the monitors. Her eyes widened as she recognized a name on a scrolling list, CAMA Logistics. "CAMA," she whispered, the word tasting like ash. That was the name on the shipping crates at the textile mill. The night of the fire. "My father kept a ledger," he said. CAMA was a ghost company. Tae-joon walked toward her, stopping just inches away. "CAMA isn't a ghost. It is a philosophy. Companionship, affection, motivation, and ambition. It was my father's original vision for the syndicate, a way to tie the brotherhood together through shared prosperity and absolute loyalty. But over 30 years, it morphed. It became a mechanism for destruction. It's no longer a brotherhood, Maya. It's a virus." He reached for a small, lacquered box on the table and opened it to reveal a silver flash drive engraved with a tiger. "Your father wasn't just a worker at that mill. He was an auditor. He discovered that my father was using CAMA to launder blood money from the States. The fire wasn't an accident. It was a restructuring dot." Maya felt a surge of hatred so hot it made her dizzy. She lunged forward, grabbing Tae-joon by his lapels, her knuckles white. "And you knew? You sat in your ivory tower while your family burned people alive for their bottom line?" Tae-joon didn't pull away. He looked down at her, his expression unreadable, though his pulse thundered against her fingertips. "I was 5 years old when that mill burned. I spent my life thinking my father was a god. Now, I am the man who has to clean up his sins before they bury us both." The air between them changed. The hatred was there, thick and suffocating, but beneath it was something else, an incompatibility so profound it felt like a physical weight. They were two halves of a tragedy, stitched together by a silver drive and a decades-old crime. Tae-joon's hand came up, not to strike her, but to gently cover hers where she gripped his suit. His skin was burning. "You want vengeance, Maya? So do I. But if you walk out that door now, you'll be dead before you hit the main road. Stay. Help me dismantle CAMA from the inside. Give me the ledger your father kept, and I will give you the man who gave the order." Maya let go of his jacket, her breath hitching. To work with the son of her enemy was a betrayal of her father's memory. But to refuse was to lose her only chance at the truth. "If you cross me, Tae-joon," she said, her voice a low, dangerous promise, "I won't just go to the police. I will burn this den to the ground with you inside it." Tae-joon smiled, a thin, tragic line. "I would expect nothing less." The transformation was complete, but the reflection in the mirror felt like a lie. Maya stood in the center of the dressing room, draped in a deep emerald hanbok-inspired gown. The silk moved like water, clinging to her curves before flaring out into a structured skirt that had a tactical knife strapped to her thigh. Her braids were intricately pinned up, adorned with a traditional silver bignyo, a long ornamental hairpin that Tae-joon had insisted she wear. "The bignyo isn't just for show," Tae-joon said, appearing in the doorway. He had traded his business suit for a formal black Doromaji overcoat, looking every bit the royal executioner of the underworld. "It belonged to my mother. It's a signal to the other families that you are under the dragon's protection. Touch the head of the pin if you're in trouble. It's a silent panic button." Maya met his eyes through the mirror. "Protection? Or ownership? Let's be clear, Tae-joon. I'm wearing this costume so I can get into your father's vault. Don't mistake my cooperation for affection." Tae-joon walked toward her, his footsteps silent on the polished floor. He stopped behind her, the scent of sandalwood and rain-chilled air enveloping her. In our world, the line between the two is often invisible. Tonight, we are guests at the Blue Crane Gala. Every major head of the CAMA network will be there. To them, you are my American acquisition. Play the part, or we both die before the first course is served. The gala was held at a restored 14th-century palace on the outskirts of Seoul, a place where history was used as a backdrop for modern-day sins. As they stepped out of the black sedan, the flashing lights of legitimate paparazzi blinded them. This was the irony of the Korean mafia. The elite were so powerful they didn't hide, they simply rebranded their violence as business. The courtyard was a sea of traditional architecture and modern decadence. Tables were laden with gold-leaf delicacies, and the air hummed with the sound of Gaegeum music played by women who looked like porcelain dolls. But beneath the elegance, Maya felt the weight of 100 stares. She was the only black woman in a room full of homogeneous power. She felt the incompatibility Tae-joon had mentioned like a physical heat. "Smile, Maya," Tae-joon whispered, his hands sliding firmly around her waist. "They are looking for a weakness. Don't give them one." They were approached by a man with a face like crumpled parchment, Elder Park, the CAMA treasurer. He looked at Maya with a sneer that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. "Tae-joon, I see the rumors are true. You've brought a vivid distraction to our table. Is she the reason you've been neglecting the Busan accounts?" Maya felt the bile rise in her throat. She knew Elder Park's name from her father's ledger. He was the one who had signed the checks that bought the gasoline for the mill fire. Her hand twitched toward her thigh, but Tae-joon's grip on her waist tightened, a silent warning. "She is an investment, Elder," Tae-joon said, his voice dropping an octave into a dangerous, silky threat. "And like all my investments, she is private. Unless you'd like to discuss the 20% discrepancy in the logistics wing in front of the entire council." Park's face paled. He bowed stiffly and retreated into the crowd. "The vault is in the North Pavilion, through the library," Tae-joon murmured, guiding her toward the bar. "The guard rotation changes in 6 minutes. I will cause a distraction with the council. You have 3 minutes to clone the drive." Can you do it? I've been planning this for 10 years, Tae-joon. I can do it in 2. The distraction was a calculated outburst of mafia politics. As Tae-joon raised his voice in a mock argument with a rival lieutenant, Maya slipped through the shadows of the paper screens. She moved with the silence of a ghost, her silk gown rustling no more than a breeze. Inside the library, the air was cool and smelled of old paper. She found the hidden panel behind a painting of a tiger. Her fingers danced over the keypad. The code was her father's birth date, a cruel irony Tae-joon had discovered in his father's personal files. The safe hissed open. Inside lay the CAMA core drive, the digital heart of the empire. As she plugged in the cloner, she heard the soft click of a gun being cocked behind her. I knew the prince's pet had claws, a voice rasped. It was a young guard, barely 20, his hand shaking. Maya didn't turn around. She watched the progress bar on her device, 80%. 90%. Put the gun down, kid. You don't want to be the reason this palace burns tonight. You're a spy, the guard hissed. You're the American girl from the fire reports. The drive beeped, 100%. Maya spun, the silver bingo from her hair already in her hand. Before the guard could pull the trigger, she lunged. She didn't kill him. She jammed the pin into the pressure point of his wrist, the weapon Tae-joon had given her acting as both a stunner and a key. The guard dropped, unconscious before he hit the floor. She stepped out of the library just as the music reached a crescendo. Tae-joon was waiting by the exit, his face a mask of practiced boredom. Their eyes met, and for a split second, the hatred and vengeance were replaced by a terrifying, electric synchronization. They weren't just allies, they were a storm. Did you get it? He asked as they walked toward the car. I have the names, she whispered, her heart hammering against her ribs. Every man who touched that fire is on this drive. Then the war officially begins, Tae-joon said. But as he looked at her, his gaze lingered on the empty space in her hair where the pin had been. He reached out, his hand trembling slightly, and tucked a loose braid behind her ear. But tonight, Maya, tonight we just survive. The safe house was a brutalist concrete bunker hidden beneath a defunct shipping warehouse in Incheon. Inside, the air was cold, smelling of ozone and high-voltage servers. The transition from the gold-leafed palace of the gala to this gray, subterranean cell was jarring, a physical manifestation of the incompatibility between the life the Khan family projected and the rot they actually occupied. Maya had traded her emerald gown for tactical gear, her fingers flying across a customized keyboard. Beside her, Tae-joon had discarded his traditional overcoat, his white dress shirt unbuttoned at the collar, sleeves rolled up to reveal the dark, swirling ink of the dragon tattoo that spiraled down his forearm. The encryption is layered, Maya muttered, her eyes reflecting the scrolling green lines of code on the wall-mounted monitors. It's not just a password. It's a biometric sequence. It's looking for a specific rhythmic pulse. It's a heartbeat. Tae-joon leaned over her shoulder, his proximity sending a jolt through her that she fought to ignore. My father always was a romantic about his cruelty. He called the CAMA ledger the pulse of the clan. He believed that if the heart stopped beating, the body, the syndicate, should die with it. He reached out, his hand hovering over the sensor pad. It's looking for a Khan. As his palm met the glass, a low hum vibrated through the room. A sequence of red locks on the screen flickered, turned amber, and finally settled into a deep, blood-like violet. The drive side open. Files cascaded across the screens. Thousands of names, dates, and dollar amounts. Maya's breath hitched as she saw the Busan Project folder. She clicked it, her heart hammering against her ribs. Images of the 1998 fire flashed by, grainy surveillance footage, police reports that had been redacted into uselessness, and the final payout list. There, Maya whispered, pointing to a name at the bottom of the list. The man who handled the disposal of the survivors. The one who made sure my mother and I were flagged as collateral threats so we could never return to Korea. Tae-joon leaned in, his face hardening into a mask of stone. The name on the screen wasn't Elder Park. It wasn't a rival. It was General Moon. General Moon? Maya asked, looking at Tae-joon's ghost-white face. Who is he? He's not mafia, Tae-joon said, his voice a low, dangerous rasp. He's the Minister of National Defense. And he's my godfather. He's the man who stood at my mother's funeral and promised to protect me. The betrayal hung in the air, thick and suffocating. The CAMA system wasn't just a mafia network, it was a parasitic vine that had climbed all the way into the blue tiles of the government. The destruction Maya saw wasn't just about a few mobsters in a dark room, it was about tearing down the very pillars of the state. Suddenly, a proximity alarm blared, a harsh red light bathing the concrete walls in the color of a fresh wound. We've been traced, Tae-joon shouted, grabbing Maya's arm. The biometric scan triggered a silent ping to the ministry. I'm not leaving without the data. Maya yelled back, slamming her fist onto the copy command. We don't have time. Maya, look at the feed. He pointed to a monitor showing the warehouse floor above. 6 black SUVs had breached the perimeter. These weren't the street soldiers from Myeongdong. These were the Ghosts, General Moon's private Black Ops unit, outfitted in state-of-the-art tactical gear and carrying silenced submachine guns. They aren't here to arrest us, Maya realized, her voice trembling. They're here to delete the evidence. And us with it. Tae-joon reached into a crate and pulled out 2 modified K2 rifles. He handed one to Maya. For a moment, they just stood there, the Korean prince and the American orphan, 2 people who should have been enemies, now the only 2 people on Earth who knew the truth. Can you shoot? Tae-joon asked, his eyes locking onto hers. In that gaze, there was a flash of that affection from the CAMA acronym, a desperate, doomed connection born in the face of certain death. I grew up in Detroit, Tae-joon, Maya said, slamming a magazine into the rifle with practiced ease. I was shooting before I could drive. The heavy steel door of the bunker began to groan under the pressure of a thermal charge. The metal glowed orange, then white. Maya, Tae-joon said, his voice surprisingly soft amidst the sirens. If we don't make it out, the 98 fire. I truly didn't know he was involved. I know, she said, and for the first time, she meant it. She reached out, her hand grazing his tattooed wrist. Now let's go make them regret coming here. The door exploded inward. The room dissolved into a chaos of smoke and muzzle flashes. Tae-joon moved like a shadow, his movements a lethal dance of traditional martial arts and modern tactical precision. Maya provided cover, her eyes sharp, her aim true. They fought as one, an incompatible unit that was somehow more effective than any army. As they fought their way toward the service elevator, a flashbang grenade detonated. Maya's world turned to white noise and blinding light. She felt a pair of strong arms wrap around her, shielding her body from the blast. I've got you, Tae-joon's voice echoed in her mind, though she couldn't hear him. As the elevator doors hummed shut, Maya saw the face of General Moon on a nearby monitor, his eyes cold and devoid of remorse. The war was no longer in the shadows. It had stepped into the light. The engine of the vintage 1970s motorbike sputtered in the thin, freezing air of the Taebaek Mountains. Maya clung to Tae-joon's waist, her face pressed against the rough wool of the jacket he'd scavenged from a roadside stop. Behind them, the flickering lights of Incheon and the reach of General Moon's ghosts felt like a lifetime away, yet the phantom sound of gunfire still echoed in her ears. They weren't heading for a hotel or a safe house. They were heading for a memory. As the sun began to bleed a bruised purple over the jagged peaks, a small village emerged from the mist. It was a cluster of hammocks that seemed to grow directly out of the mountainside, their wooden beams weathered to a silver gray. This was Chang'an, a place where time had forgotten to move, and where Tae-joon's grandmother had spent her final days in exile from the syndicate's greed. No one comes here, Tae-joon rasped, his breath visible in the morning chill. He kicked the kickstand down in front of a modest house at the edge of a precipice. My father hasn't set foot on this soil in 30 years. He considers this place a graveyard of failures. Maya dismounted, her legs shaking from the hours of riding. She looked out over the sea of clouds below them. In my world, we call this a hideout. In yours, I guess it's just another piece of stolen history. Tae-joon didn't respond. He led her inside, the smell of aged cedar and dried herbs meeting them. The house was minimalist, polished floorboards, a low table, and a single silk screen painted with a solitary crane. There were no monitors here. No biometric scanners. No CAMA. For the first time since landing in Korea, the incompatibility between them felt different. In Seoul, they were a clash of cultures and agendas. Here, under the watchful eyes of the mountains, they were simply two broken souls seeking shelter from the same storm. While Tae-joon tended to a small fire in the Agungi, traditional floor heating system, Maya sat on the porch, staring at the silver drive. The data they had stolen was a ticking time bomb. It contained the proof that the CAMA network was fueling a silent coup, with General Moon at the helm. "You're bleeding again," Tae-joon said softly. He appeared behind her, holding a bowl of warm water and a strip of clean cloth. Maya touched her side, where a grazed bullet wound from the bunker was weeping through her shirt. She tried to take the cloth from him, but he knelt before her, his expression uncharacteristically tender. "Let me," he whispered. As he cleaned the wound, the silence between them grew heavy, not with the hatred of their ancestors, but with a terrifying, New York Minute kind of love. It was the companionship part of CAMA, stripped of its corporate malice and returned to its human root. "Why are you doing this, Tae-joon?" Maya asked, her voice barely a whisper. "You could have handed me over. You could have stayed the prince. You're throwing away an empire for a woman who wants to see her family name erased from history." Tae-joon stopped, his hand resting near her waist. He looked up, and for the first time, the mafia man was gone. "The empire was already a cage, Maya. My father built it with fire, and Moon is trying to rule it with shadows. I don't want to be a prince in a kingdom of ashes." He reached out, his thumb tracing the line of her jaw. "And as for you, you are the first thing in my life that wasn't a calculated move. You are the only truth I have left." Maya leaned into his touch, her heart warring with her vows of vengeance. She thought of her father, of the smoke-filled lungs and the screams in Busan. But she also looked at the man in front of her, the man who had shielded her body with his own. The incompatibility was still there. He was the son of the destroyer, and she was the daughter of the destroyed. But as the first snow of the season began to fall, dusting the traditional black tiles of the roof in white, they leaned toward each other. The kiss was desperate, tasting of salt and wood smoke. It was a betrayal of their pasts and a vow for a future that neither of them expected to see. In the heart of the dragon's den, they were enemies. But on this silent peak, they were just two people trying to stay warm before the world came to claim them. "They'll find us soon," Maya said against his lips. "Let them come," Tae-joon replied, his eyes dark with a new kind of ambition. "They think they're hunting a traitor and a spy. They don't realize they've walked into a trap of their own making." Inside the house, the silver drive blinked once in the darkness, a digital pulse in a world of ancient stone. The piece of the mountain was an illusion, a glass ornament destined to shatter. It happened just before dawn, in that gray hour when the world feels unfinished. The soft crunch of snow wasn't from a mountain goat or a falling branch. It was rhythmic. Tactical. Tae-joon was awake before the first door was kicked in. His hand clamped over Maya's mouth, his eyes wide and sharp in the dim light of the dying embers. "Don't breathe," he hissed. He didn't need to tell her twice. Maya reached for the tactical knife she'd tucked under the floor mat. The incompatibility of their lives had taught them both the same lesson: safety was a lie you told yourself to get to sleep. The village of Chong'an had betrayed them. It wasn't the elders, they were too old to care for the politics of the lowlands. It was the young man who had sold them the fuel for the motorbike, a boy with a debt to a CAMA-linked gambling den in Seoul. For a handful of one and a wiped slate, he had signaled the ghosts. "Back door," Tae-joon whispered, grabbing the silver drive and his K2 rifle. They slid through the paper doors just as a flashbang detonated in the front room. The explosion turned the serene Hannock into a furnace of white light. They didn't look back. They sprinted toward the vintage motorbike, the engine roaring to life with a defiant scream that echoed off the granite peaks. "Hold on!" Tae-joon shouted. Maya wrapped her arms around him, feeling the tension in his back like a drawn bowstring. As they peeled away, 3 matte black SUVs roared up the narrow, winding path, their high beams cutting through the mist like the eyes of a prehistoric predator. The descent was a suicide mission. The road was a series of hairpin turns carved into the side of the cliff, slick with black ice and fresh powder. Tae-joon drove like a man who had nothing left to lose but the woman behind him. He leaned the bike into the curves until the foot pegs scraped sparks against the frozen asphalt. "They're gaining!" Maya yelled over the wind. She twisted in her seat, pulling her handgun. The first SUV surged forward, attempting to ram their back tire. Maya didn't hesitate. She waited for the bounce of the suspension, then fired 3 shots into the SUV's windshield. The driver swerved, the vehicle sliding sideways, its tires screaming before it slammed into the rock face, erupting in a shower of glass and metal. But the other 2 didn't slow down. From the sunroof of the second vehicle, a ghost emerged, brandishing an automatic weapon. Tae-joon, zigzag. Bullets peppered the road around them, kicking up chunks of ice. Tae-joon swerved violently, the bike wobbling on the edge of the precipice. Below them, a 1,000-foot drop into the misty valley waited. "There's a bridge ahead," Tae-joon yelled. "A wooden one, old trade route. The SUVs are too heavy for it. And we aren't. We're going to find out." The bridge was a sagging skeleton of timber and rope, swaying in the mountain gale. It looked like a relic from a different century, utterly incompatible with the high-tech pursuit following them. Tae-joon didn't slow down. He accelerated. The bike hit the wooden planks with a bone-jarring thud. The wood groaned, snapping under the weight. Maya squeezed her eyes shut for a split second as they flew over a gap in the rotting timber. Behind them, the lead SUV reached the mouth of the bridge. The driver hesitated, braking hard. The second SUV, driven by a man blinded by the ambition to collect General Moon's bounty, didn't stop. It rammed the first car, pushing it onto the fragile wood. The sound was like a thunderclap. The ancient bridge gave way, the center section dropping into the abyss. Maya watched in the side mirror as the 2 black vehicles plummeted into the fog, their headlights spinning like dying stars until they vanished. Tae-joon skidded to a halt on the far side of the ravine. The silence that followed was deafening. The only sound was the ticking of the cooling engine and their own ragged breathing. Maya slumped against his back, her forehead resting on his shoulder. "We're alive," she whispered, the hatred for the men chasing them momentarily eclipsed by the sheer terror of the fall. Tae-joon turned the bike off and dismounted, his hands shaking as he pulled her into a hard, desperate embrace. The snow was falling harder now, beginning to cover the tracks of their escape. "They know we're heading for the coast," Tae-joon said, his voice cracking. "The drive, it has a GPS failsafe. If I don't get it to the server in Busan within 6 hours, it wipes itself." Maya pulled back, looking at the silver tiger engraved on the drive. "Then we don't go to the coast. We go to the one place they'd never expect us to return to." "Where?" Maya's eyes flashed with a cold, American grit. "The textile mill. The grave where this all started. If General Moon wants to finish this, he's going to have to walk through the ashes of the people he murdered." The love between them was no longer a sanctuary, it was a weapon. And as they looked down at the wreckage in the valley, they knew the destruction was only just beginning. The stench of decay was the first thing that hit Maya. Not the clean decay of mountain soil, but the metallic, acrid smell of burnt dreams and forgotten lives. The Busan textile mill was a skeleton against the bruised morning sky, its rusted girders reaching like skeletal fingers. 27 years had passed, but the ghost of the 1998 fire still clung to every shattered window and blackened brick. Tae-joon killed the motorbike engine a mile out, preferring to approach on foot. The ground was uneven, choked with weeds and broken glass. He wore a grim mask, his face unreadable. This wasn't just Maya's tragedy, it was the genesis of his own gilded cage. "My father bought this land cheap after the fire," Tae-joon explained, his voice low. "Built the Busan logistics hub just down the road. This place was supposed to be a monument to his ruthlessness. A warning. It's a tomb, Maya corrected, her voice brittle. She stopped before a crumbling section of wall, recognizing the faint outline of her father's old office window. The hatred she carried felt like a physical weight in her chest, heavy and cold. They never found all the bodies. My father, he was found days later, not in his office, but in the warehouse. Like he was trying to save someone. The silver drive in Tae-joon's pocket pulsed faintly, reminding them of its ticking clock. 3 hours until wipe. They needed to find the entry point to the server network Moon was using. The drive's GPS led us here for a reason, Maya said, scanning the ruins. The mill wasn't just a target, it was a Trojan horse. A hiding place. They moved through the desolate shell of the building. Weeds pushed through cracked concrete. Twisted metal lay everywhere, monuments to a catastrophe. Maya stopped suddenly, her eyes fixed on a section of the floor near what would have been the main dive vats, a place her father had always warned her was a danger zone. This floor, she murmured, tracing a faint, almost invisible seam in the concrete with her boot. It's too perfect. Too new. It was poured over something. Tae-joon knelt, pulling out a small, specialized sensor from his pack. He ran it over the floor. The device glowed green, then vibrated. There's a hollow space beneath. A bunker. He then located a disguised pressure plate near a stack of collapsed crates. With a grunt, he cleared the debris. The plate was cold, designed to blend in perfectly. He pressed it. With a low groan of ancient hydraulics, a section of the concrete floor retracted, revealing a narrow, dark stairwell leading down into the earth. The air that wafted up was cool, sterile, and faintly metallic, the smell of untouched technology. The ambition of my father, Tae-joon whispered, his voice tinged with disgusted awe. He didn't just burn the mill. He built a hidden command center beneath it. A secret nexus for the CAMA network. As they descended, the flickering light of their tactical flashlights revealed concrete walls lined with soundproofing, reinforced steel doors, and emergency lighting that still hummed faintly. This wasn't just a bunker, it was a relic, preserved in perfect, terrifying condition. They reached a large, circular chamber. In the center, beneath a giant, holographic projection of the CAMA network, a complex web of glowing red and blue lines connecting cities across the globe, stood a massive, antique Korean Gosu drum, ornately carved with dragons. And within the drum, disguised as its heartbeat, was the main server for General Moon's operation. This is it, Maya breathed, her hand going to her heart. This was the source. This was where the companionship had devolved into something monstrous. But they weren't alone. A low, guttural chuckle echoed from the shadows. Standing near a console, his back to them, was General Moon. He wore a crisp military uniform, his silver hair glinting in the holographic light. He hadn't aged well, his face was a roadmap of cruel lines. I knew you'd come here, Tae-joon, Moon said, turning slowly. His eyes, cold and reptilian, fixed on Maya. And I knew you'd bring your foreign pet. You always were too sentimental for the clan, just like your grandmother. This is where your father's weakness began. And this is where it ends. Moon's gaze drifted to the silver drive in Tae-joon's hand. The pulse of the clan. Foolish to think you could simply plug it into my network. It was always a trap. The moment you activated it at your bunker, you pinged its location to me. You led me right to the final piece of the puzzle. Moon reached for a ceremonial dagger on the console, its blade glinting. Now, give me the drive, Prince. Or watch your American toy die like her father did. The air crackled with unspoken threats. Maya remembered her father's last words to her mother, whispered over a crackling phone line just before the fire consumed him. Tell Maya, always fight for what's right. Her gaze met Tae-joon's. The love that had bloomed between them in the silent peak was now hardened steel. The betrayal of their families was a shared burden. The destruction they had vowed was finally at hand. You won't get it, Maya said, stepping forward. Not if you kill us both. Moon smiled, a chilling, humorless baring of teeth. Then perhaps I'll just have to. The air in the bunker thrummed with a deadly energy. General Moon, the mastermind of a 27-year deception, stood before them, his ceremonial dagger glinting in the holographic light of the CAMA network. The giant Gosu drum, the heart of his operation, pulsed with a hypnotic rhythm, casting long, shifting shadows around them. You speak of fighting for what's right, American. Moon sneered, his eyes flicking to Maya. Your father preached the same foolishness. It earned him a fiery death. You cling to the boy Tae-joon, believing in his hollow promises? He is a con. Blood always binds, little bird. Tae-joon took a step forward, shielding Maya slightly. The blood that binds me, General, is stained with your lies. You promised my father loyalty. You gave him a knife in the back in a war he didn't want. Moon let out a chilling laugh. Your father was a visionary, but a weak one. He saw the companionship of CAMA, not the ambition. He wanted a small pond. I saw an ocean. And you, Prince, are standing in my way. He raised the dagger, not lunging at them, but driving the blade into the side of the Gosu drum. The holographic network above them flickered, then intensified, turning a furious blood red. Alarms blared, echoing through the bunker. The drive, Tae-joon. Maya shouted, her eyes on the countdown timer that had appeared on one of the smaller monitors, 2 minutes and 59 seconds. He's activating a system-wide purge. It'll wipe the drive and incinerate this whole bunker. Moon smiled, a twisted, triumphant grin. And take my secrets with me. A fitting end for the son of a traitor and the daughter of a fool. Your love will be nothing but ash. Tae-joon didn't hesitate. He pulled the K2 rifle from his back, a blur of motion. Moon, despite his age, moved with surprising speed, kicking a hidden switch on the floor. Heavy steel blast doors slammed down, sealing off the exits. 2 minutes. Maya yelled, drawing her handgun. The fight was a symphony of chaos. Tae-joon, with his fluid, precise movements, engaged Moon in a brutal hand-to-hand combat, their blows echoing like hammer strikes against steel. Moon fought with the cold efficiency of a seasoned soldier, his ceremonial dagger a wicked extension of his arm. He parried Tae-joon's rifle but with terrifying grace, his eyes never leaving his opponent. Maya provided covering fire, aiming for the monitors and auxiliary systems that controlled the purge. Her shots were precise, but the bunker's reinforced technology was designed to withstand a siege. Each impact sent sparks flying, but the countdown continued its relentless march. The drum. Tae-joon gasped, grunting as Moon's dagger grazed his arm. The drum is the only weak point. If we can disable it. Moon parried a kick from Tae-joon, his eyes narrowing. Foolish boy. This drum has stood for centuries. You cannot simply disable the pulse of an empire. Maya saw her chance. While Tae-joon kept Moon engaged, she scrambled onto a low console, aiming her pistol at the intricate carvings on the drum. This was where their incompatibility became their greatest strength. Tae-joon fought with the strength of a dragon, head-on. Maya fought with the precision of a surgeon, striking at the heart of the beast. 1 minute and 45 seconds. Moon saw her move. With a roar of fury, he broke free from Tae-joon and lunged for Maya, his dagger arcing toward her. But Tae-joon was faster. He threw himself between them, taking the full force of Moon's charge. They crashed into the holographic projection, the glowing network rippling and distorting around them. Maya fired. The bullet ricocheted off the ornate drum, hitting a hidden circuit panel inside with a shower of sparks. The holographic network above them flickered erratically, then began to collapse, lines snapping, colors dying. Moon screamed in frustration, pushing Tae-joon away. You insolent child. You've destroyed it. But the purge countdown was still active. 1 minute. We need to get the drive into the server. Maya shouted, pointing at a glowing port on the side of the drum that had been exposed by the blast. It's a direct uplink. Tae-joon, bleeding from a fresh cut on his cheek, nodded grimly. He lunged for the drive, but Moon, fueled by a lifetime of hatred and decades of ambition, intercepted him. They grappled, rolling across the floor, their hands fighting for control of the silver key. 30 seconds. Maya knew what she had to do. This was her motivation. This was the true meaning of destruction. She emptied her clip into the control panel beside the drum, creating a blinding explosion that momentarily disoriented Moon. As the general stumbled back, Tae-joon, with a surge of desperate strength, slammed the silver drive into the glowing port. The drum let out a deafening, resonant thrum. The alarms changed from a panicked wail to a triumphant, sustained chime. The blood-red holographic network dissolved, replaced by a clean, vibrant blue. The blast doors hissed open. The purge was averted. The data was uploaded. But the fight wasn't over. Moon stared at them, his face contorted in a silent scream of rage and betrayal. He lunged one last time, not for the dagger, but for a hidden detonator on his belt. "If I can't have my empire," Moon roared, "then no one will." 5 seconds. Tae-joon saw the glint of the detonator. Without a word, he grabbed Maya, pulling her into a desperate embrace, shielding her body with his own as the bunker prepared to collapse around them. This wasn't just a fight for justice. It was a fight for survival. And in that final second, as the bunker shook around them, the love that had bloomed between them was the only thing that felt real. The world didn't end with a whimper, it ended with a roar that shook the very foundations of the Busan coast. As the detonator in General Moon's hand clicked, the secondary charges, the failsafes he had installed to ensure his secrets died with him, ignited. The concrete floor buckled like paper. Dust, ancient and thick, exploded from the vents, turning the air into a gray tomb. "Run!" Tae-joon's voice was a jagged edge, barely audible over the groaning of the structural steel. He didn't wait for her to move. He gripped Maya's hand, his fingers interlocking with hers with a strength that spoke of a terrified, desperate love. They scrambled up the narrow stairwell as the circular chamber below dissolved into a hellscape of fire and collapsing machinery. Behind them, General Moon was swallowed by the red glow of his own failed ambition, a silhouette of a man who chose a grave over a confession. They burst out of the hatch and onto the floor of the textile mill just as the ground beneath them sank. The shockwave threw them forward, glass shards from the remaining windows raining down like diamonds of ice. Maya felt the heat on her back, the same heat her father must have felt. For a second, the past and the present blurred into a single, blinding moment of destruction. They didn't stop until they reached the perimeter fence. Maya collapsed onto the gravel, her lungs screaming for air that wasn't filled with pulverized concrete. She turned back. The ruins of the mill were gone, replaced by a massive sinkhole that belched black smoke into the early morning sky. The drive. Maya wheezed, clutching her chest. "Tae-joon, the upload, did it finish?" Tae-joon stood over her, his charcoal suit shredded, his face masked in soot and blood. He looked toward the horizon, where the first light of dawn was beginning to touch the sea. He pulled a cracked smartphone from his pocket. The screen flickered, showing a simple, glowing blue progress bar, 100% broadcast complete. "It didn't just upload to a server, Maya," Tae-joon said, his voice hollow with exhaustion. "I routed it through the national press satellite. Every news agency from Seoul to New York just received the CAMA files. General Moon's face, my father's ledgers, the shipping manifests, it's all out. The ghost is finally in the light. The betrayal was total. The Dragon Clan, the Ministry of Defense, the silent architects of the 1998 fire, their empire was being dismantled in real time by millions of refreshes and downloads. But as the adrenaline faded, a new, colder reality set in. They were standing on the edge of a massive crime scene in a country that would soon be hunting for scapegoats. Tae-joon was still the heir to a criminal syndicate, and Maya was still an undocumented threat who had just helped blow up a government-linked facility. "We have to move," Tae-joon said, reaching down to pull her up. "The local police will be here in minutes. The ghosts who survived the mountain won't be far behind." "Move where?" Maya asked, looking at her bruised hands. "There's nowhere left to hide, Tae-joon. We're the most famous fugitives on the planet now." Tae-joon looked at her, and for the first time, the incompatibility of their worlds felt like a bridge rather than a chasm. He wasn't the prince anymore, and she wasn't the orphan. They were just two people who had burned the world down to find the truth. "There is a boat," he said. "In the harbor. It belongs to a man who owed my mother a life debt. He doesn't ask for names, and he doesn't check passports. He's leaving for international waters in an hour." They made their way toward the Busan docks, moving through the shadows of the shipping containers. The city was waking up to a storm. On every digital billboard and storefront television, the face of General Moon was plastered next to the word treason. The CAMA logo was being dissected by pundits and journalists. The destruction was beautiful in its totality. As they reached the pier, a rusted trawler swayed in the choppy water. A man in a heavy rain slicker nodded to Tae-joon, gesturing for them to hurry. Maya paused at the edge of the gangplank. She looked back at the smoke rising from the textile mill in the distance. The vows of vengeance she had carried for a decade were finally fulfilled, but they left a hole in her heart that felt like a canyon. "Maya," Tae-joon called from the deck. He held out his hand. She looked at him, the man who was her enemy, her protector, and her greatest complication. The love between them was a dangerous, fragile thing, born in fire and sustained by blood. It was a love that shouldn't exist, between two people who were never meant to meet. She took his hand and stepped onto the boat. As the trawler pulled away from the dock, the sun finally broke over the horizon, turning the sea into a sheet of beaten gold. They stood at the railing, watching Korea shrink into a thin line of blue. They were leaving behind their names, their legacies, and their ghosts. "What happens now?" Maya asked, the wind whipping her braids. Tae-joon watched the smoke fade into the clouds. "Now, we find out who we are when there's no one left to fight." The island was a speck of emerald in the vast, sapphire expanse of the Andaman Sea, thousands of miles from the neon-soaked alleys of Seoul. Here, the air didn't smell of exhaust or ozone, it smelled of salt, frangipani, and the damp earth of the rainforest. Time didn't move in minutes or headlines, it moved with the tide. 6 months had passed since the world watched the Dragon's Den crumble on live television. In the international press, the CAMA scandal was still a headline, but the protagonists had become urban legends. Some said the prince and the American had died in the bunker explosion, others whispered they were living in a penthouse in Paris. In reality, Maya was sitting on the wooden steps of a small stilt house, her skin glowing under the tropical sun. She was wearing a simple linen wrap, her hair free of the silver biniou that now sat in a velvet box inside. She was shelling fruit, her movements slow and deliberate, a piece she had never known in Detroit or Busan. Tae-joon emerged from the tree line, carrying a catch of fish. He had traded his charcoal suits for weathered sarongs and bare feet. His frame was leaner, his face tanned, and the dragon tattoo on his arm was often partially hidden by the shadow of the palms. The incompatibility that had once defined them had smoothed out, like two jagged stones rubbing together in a river until they were polished and round. "The boat from the mainland brought supplies," Tae-joon said, dropping the net. He sat beside her, his shoulder brushing hers. There was no hesitation in the touch anymore. The affection was no longer a corporate acronym, it was the quiet gravity of two people who had chosen each other over the world. "Any news?" Maya asked, her voice soft. Tae-joon pulled a crumpled newspaper from his pocket, printed in a language they were still learning to read. General Moon's trial concluded. Life imprisonment. My father's assets have been seized by a state-appointed board. The Dragon Clan is being liquidated. Maya looked out at the horizon. "In the CAMA vision? Is it dead?" "The organization is," Tae-joon replied, his eyes following a white crane flying low over the water. "But the ambition, that never really dies. It just changes shape. There will always be men like Moon. But there won't be another mill fire. Not on our watch." The destruction they had wrought was total, but the aftermath was a quiet, lingering shadow. They were dead to the world, living on a vow of silence that was as binding as any mafia oath. They could never return home. They could never use their real names. They were ghosts, haunting a paradise That evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of bruised plum and gold, they walked along the shore. The waves licked at their feet, erasing their footprints as soon as they were made. "Do you regret it?" Maya asked suddenly. "The prince who gave up a kingdom for a girl from Detroit." Tae-joon stopped, turning her to face him. He reached out, his hand, once used for violence, now gently cupping her cheek. "I didn't give up a kingdom, Maya. I escaped a prison. My life before you was a script written by dead men. Here, the pages are blank." Maya leaned into his palm. "I used to think vengeance was the only thing that could fill the hole my father left. I thought if I burned it all down, I'd finally feel whole." "And do you?" "No," she admitted, looking him in the eyes. "The hole is still there. But it's not a void anymore. It's just space. Space for something new." The love between them was the ultimate act of rebellion. It was a love that ignored borders, history, and the blood-soaked legacies of their fathers. It was incompatible with the world they came from, so they had built a world of their own. As the stars began to pierce the velvet sky, Tae-joon pulled a small object from his pocket. It wasn't a weapon or a drive. It was a small, hand-carved wooden charm in the shape of a tiger and a crane intertwined. "My mother used to say that when the dragon falls, the birds can finally sing," he whispered. They stood there for a long time, watching the bioluminescent plankton glow in the surf, like fallen stars trapped in the water. They were fugitives, they were survivors, and they were, finally, free. The story of the Korean mafia and the American lady didn't end with a bang or a funeral. It ended with the sound of the tide, and the quiet, unwritten law of a heart that had finally found its home.